Mark here for another great Wisdom and Knowledge 5 podcast episode. And I am so honored to have John Potash, who did the documentary Shots Eugenics to Pandemics, among others. And John, just give an overview of, what inspired you to make this documentary and just a background of who you are.
Sure. So I've mainly been working as a psychotherapist for the last 35 years, and um, when I started out in drug counseling in 1989, and then in 1995, I went to grad school to get a higher level, counseling degree, but also studied sociology with a great professor named Richard Cloward, who wrote some great books with his wife, Frances Fox Piven. And so I studied. I was always doing some activism on the side and writing on the side, and I started a activist newspaper that I sold to professors around the country in graduate school and sold in bulk around the country. And so I was always doing activism and writing while studying other things. And now, working as a psychotherapist, uh, I, I ended up coming out with a book that I was researching called The FBI War on Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders. And then that was really a subsection of the book, Drugs as Weapons Against Us, the CIA War on Musicians and Activists. And I made a movie out of the book, Drugs as Weapons Against Us. And then I was working on a sequel to that film. And while I was working on that sequel, we, came into the COVID-19 pandemic
Hmm.
situation. And, I guess it was about March of 2020, it really hit America. And I started seeing, a lot of bizarre things happening, really horrible things happening to, I'd call it fascist kind of actions by our government saying you can't work,
Hmm.
your stores have to close for, unlimited amount of time. Kids can't go to school. And I thought it was very bizarre. You have to wear these face masks, etc. But I just assumed they were telling us the truth at first. But generally speaking, with all my research on the government, you always have to question authority, I believe, and I thought you always have to question them, especially when they carry out really authoritarian, fascist kind of actions like
Hmm.
that to do these things. And basically, when they closed small businesses, they closed a large amount of them down for good because they didn't have enough money to
Hmm.
reopen again. They say over 40% of black businesses never reopened again. Huge amounts of people were lost their businesses around the country, and while working on the sequel to Drugs as Weapons Against Us, which I came out with maybe some 6 months ago or 8 months ago now, it's called CIA Drugs Are Us, the Drugs as Weapons sequel.
Hmm.
I diverted from that and created Shots Eugenics to Pandemics, and I did that because I kept finding good researchers and good knowledgeable experts that were saying things like, for example, Alex Berenson, 11-year reporter for the New York Times, coming out with his series. I think it was called Unknown Truths or something to that effect. About, for example, he analyzed what the government came out with about if there's a pandemic. Here's the highest level of pandemic. Here's what we would do, and the next highest level, etc. And their original plan for everything uh, was just thrown away.
Hmm.
They never said, even with the highest level pandemic, would they ever close schools for a full year or more, which is what they did. They closed it. They said they would only close schools for maybe a few weeks at a time, and and they didn't say they closed down jobs. It didn't make sense about that. I mean, close down stores because it didn't make sense
Hmm.
for them to close small stores and leave the big ones open.
Yep.
It didn't make sense for them to leave liquor stores open, Walmart open, and all that. And so, but basically, the bigger stores could ride out being closed down. The smaller stores have a harder time doing that, and so they're really hurting the population in a big way and transferring wealth up to these bigger, wealthier store owners, of Walmarts, et cetera, and up to the tech companies with Amazon and all that. And so, having studied the corruption of government, I saw that happening, and I found the experts to show why this may be happening. And experts talking about trials, and studies saying these masks just may not work at all.
Hmm.
And for us to be depriving our brains of oxygen and making us, breathe in our own carbon, dioxide wasn't good for us, obviously. And yet they still say that's the healthiest way to go at times. And so I found loads of experts that were saying that this vaccine also was going to be very dangerous. And statistics and the only government reporting system, VAERS, Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, just shows that. And every reporting system shows that once the vaccine started, deaths rose to astronomical levels. More deaths were caused by this COVID-19 vaccine than all the other vaccines combined in the last maybe 30 plus years. And so it's really been incredible all that's happened. And I thought, someone's got to document this. And thankfully, a lot of films have come out about this, but I don't think very many comedies have come out with about it. So I'm glad to make it partial comedy so that people can have some, just moments of laughter in between the darkness, all the dark, facts and information too.
Yeah, and things that are in the video which make perfect sense is like Jerome Adams, at Fauci, you name it, saying, you shouldn't be wearing a mask, and then flip-flopping and saying you should be wearing a mask. There's so much in there. Everyone really needs to see this documentary because it
Thanks.
shows that it was a complete agenda.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad also to show Fauci and these other government officials in press conferences where they're all wearing masks talking about these things, and then as soon as the camera turns off, they all take off their masks.
Exactly.
So it's such a joke. To be able to catch them is great in these kinds of, you know, theater situations because so much of government is theater, and it's just it's a theater that's dark theater. That's really doing what they can to fool us, and we if we can just be more educated and figure these things out for ourselves, and also of course read up on things and listen to alternative experts too, get different points of view, we can really see what's going on and protect ourselves better.
And not from fake, health people like Bill Gates or Tedros,
Right.
uh
Yeah, and Bill Gates just is I show that he really is just the it appears at least that from a person very high up at IBM, that Bill Gates was taken out of his garage, and given, after he dropped out of college and was tinkering with computers in his garage, taken out of there by 900 IBM employees, including, according to this person high up at IBM, and just given this huge position and this, to be a front man for what was, really seems to be an IBM auxiliary company that they didn't want to, show their hand that they were part of that. And then his next job apparently was when he resigned from that company was not to be this humanitarian doing good for the world. It was to be the front man for an agenda, which was to promote vaccines all over the world. And in doing that, this so-called humanitarian work, he basically doubled his wealth in 10 years. So
hmm
it's quite the humanitarian work where you double your wealth. So I wish I could find a volunteer job that doubled my wealth. But so that's what he was doing, and in promoting these vaccines, leading journals, peer-reviewed journals, showed that these vaccines he was promoting were causing infertility, they were causing paralysis, they were causing all kinds of problems. They were increasing mortality in and girls in some countries. It was just all kinds of horrible things were happening with his vaccination promotion campaigns in different, in mostly, countries of color, third world countries of color, but also countries like India, which are, is a very established, more of a first world country. But he paid off, it seems like, so many government officials to be able to get his vaccine programs, instituted in those countries.
And one thing that tied in is you brought the history of this because it starts when is it in the early 1900s or maybe late 1800s and the roots were basically around like the Rockefeller medical industry that was established, but even things like the Spanish flu, which they just named it the Spanish flu. It didn't come out of Spain. Talk about that.
Yeah, so this is, I do have to, I feel like I had to start with the eugenics movement because um, most of these players, did come out of that movement. I mean, IBM, um, what, really was backing Hitler, and that's was, early, further along in that movement. But that movement started in the early 1900s, and it was started by the Rockefellers, the Carnegies. This the eugenics movement. I mean, a book was written about this idea of eugenics by a British uh, medical person who was just writing it apparently for the royalty to back their claims of genetic superiority, and it caught on with the Americans who loved the British royalty, these wealthiest Americans, and so these families, such as the Carnegies and the Rockefellers and the J.P. Morgan family and the Harrimans and those types, were putting vast amounts of money into this movement called eugenics, and they bought up professorships around the country. They bought politicians. They bought out the leading newspapers and journals and magazines around the country to support this idea that basically the eugenics movement said that percentages of people of all ethnicities, people of color, were 90% genetically inferior. They said people, Jewish people were, about 60% inferior. Uh, Catholics were about 40 some percent inferior. And people, even people that were, they were saying things like truancy is genetically is part of the genetic inferiority. Paying fines late is due to genetic inferiority. All these crazy things. The people who are poor were genetically inferior. They're basically saying so. Really, it was just the wealthy Anglo-Saxon Protestant, middle class on up, that were not genetically inferior, and so they made up these fake IQ tests at the time to supposedly justify these what they were these crazy statements, and they then began to feed people in public hospitals such as Illinois milk from tubercular cows, to which caused loads of deaths in these hospitals, in these public hospitals. And there was percentages of like half the patients in these hospitals dying when they weren't meant to die, and so it was huge amounts of tuberculosis and huge amounts of other diseases. And so they also put out these promotional films, such as The Black Stork, which was like the most popular film of its time, and it played in all the theater, in like most major theaters for about 15 years straight. How top films have a run of maybe a few months usually.
Hmm.
It played for 15 years straight, and The Black Stork was about these doctors that were killing babies that because they said they were coming from genetically inferior parents. And so it's really incredible the kinds of horrible things they were doing. And they were sterilizing mothers and things like that. And these eugenics laws actually got on the law books in over half the states in the country, and
Hmm.
stayed in law books in a lot of these southern states up until even the 1970s. And so even after Hitler's Germany, they, which was backed by these eugenics folks, putting tons of money into Germany after Germany was left in terrible shape after World War One, put tons of money into these eugenics programs in Germany, and at a time when Germany was so bereft that they would take any money they could, and funded Hitler. The Bush family was actually uh, Prescott Bush was the father of George Bush Senior, President George Bush Senior, and Prescott Bush was president of a group called Brown Brothers Harriman, of course, which was the Harriman family, and Brown Brothers were the leading top financiers in the United States at the time, and it was also included some English financiers who were incredibly wealthy, tied to the royalty, and they uh, funded the brown shirts that backed Hitler, that got Hitler in power, and this was some of the people that were involved in all this, but basically that was their philosophy: is they were incredibly anti-Semitic, they were incredibly prejudiced against all people of all ethnicities that weren't, this certain Aryan type, and and sadly enough, a lot of these major corporations backed the Nazi regime behind, the government's back apparently. And I guess the person that wrote the best book on that was a guy named Eugene Black, who wrote a book called War Against the Weak about the eugenics movement that has been translated into dozens of languages around the world. But he also wrote a book called IBM and the Holocaust that was just focused on a lot of corporations backing Hitler, but IBM in particular had incredible backing of Hitler with the computerized systems to make the Holocaust much more efficient and faster. And each of the tattoos on these concentration camp people's arms represented a kind of code for the holler and the punch cards they used for the earliest computers. So they this is some of what happened with that eugenics movement. Now, when basically the Soviet Union and you could say the Allies beat the Germans back, um, that's when eugenics kind of went a little more underground and wasn't so out in the open. And but I argue that it still stayed alive, and it stayed alive in different other more nefarious, like discrete means, and argue through medicine. And so that's when really the vaccine program got underway in a much bigger way in the 1950s. And with the vaccine program, we found when it was first starting, the highest level woman in the NIH, National Institute of Health, a woman named Beatrice Eddy, said that she found a cancer-causing agent in the first polio vaccine, and in that cancer-causing agent was SV40, simian virus 40, because it came out of monkeys. They used monkey tissue, and so they said that it caused cancer later in life for all these kids that got vaccinated. And so that, even though she blew the whistle on that, some companies like voluntarily sent their vaccines back, but and the other companies didn't. And the company, so the SV40 filled vaccines stayed on the market until about 1963. And this is like many years of people getting this vaccine that would later cause cancer in their lives. And so it was almost it could be 5 to 10 years of people getting these vaccines that could had the cancer causing element in them. So finally they took that, they changed that vaccine, but they pushed for more and more vaccines. And until now, these days, we I don't know how old you are, but so I was born in the mid 60s, and I got maybe 3 or 4 or 5 at most vaccine shots in my life. And but now people are getting about 72, 73 shots
Yeah.
of maybe 12 to 15 vaccines. And so um, I had to show some of that, and I argue, the evidence is that this was a continuation of the eugenics movement when they put a cancer-causing element in these vaccines. And so then you get to the point of 1986 when they pass a law to get to be completely immune from legislation from being sued for these
Yeah.
dangerous vaccines.
Hmm.
With the National Vaccine Act in 1986, and that's when it really skyrocketed how many vaccines were put on the childhood schedule for being allowed in public schools, with saying you're fully vaccinated, and that's when autism rates just went through the roof. It went from 1 in 10,000 or so to what's now about 1 in 32 or 33 kids are diagnosed with autism. And if you add other neurological symptoms and major allergies and things like that, it's much even higher than that.
Hmm. And when you look at it too, especially in today's time, but it's probably been that way for a long time, is look who owns the media and look who sponsors the media. There's all these big pharma commercials, and not only media. You look at sports, you look at, you know, uh, TV shows, you name it.
Right, right. And so my first two, so in this project, I do have a bit of a smaller section, but a section on yes, that media ownership. And so earlier on, I showed how these eugenics folks bought out. It was about 19, I believe, 1913 or so, or 1917, I forget now. But it was the 19 teens when the J.P. Morgan family and Rockefeller family interests bought out like all the major newspapers in the country, the biggest newspapers, and bought out the most influential journals. And but they kept like kind of consolidating their ownership of the media, monopolizing more and more of the media until when come around 2000s, you had Bernie Sanders and Senator Maria Cantwell hold a press conference talking about the ownership of the media and the ownership, the control of all of our information. They say over 90% of our information is controlled by about 5 or 6 multinational corporations. And so, yeah, that's necessary for understanding how they control the narrative and how they can push this without allowing dissent to reach our ears, reach most people's ears. And so that's why when they finally rolled out this COVID 19 fear and scare and all that, not that wasn't worrisome just to get sick, but what they were doing is they were pushing an agenda that we don't know how dangerous it really was, because the hospitals were so incentivized
Yeah.
to call people who came in there with what could have been just a common cold, because they didn't talk about the flu or colds anymore. And so someone could have just had a really bad cold or really bad flu, thought it was COVID, thought, oh my God, I'm going to die. Goes to the emergency room, go to the hospital. They call it COVID because if they call it COVID, they can get some 30 some $1,000
Yeah.
extra for that patient. And if they get put on a ventilator, they get a whole lot more money. And if they give remdesivir, they get a whole lot more money. And so hospitals were first said to not let other patients in because they needed room for these COVID patients, which we don't know if that's true or not. But now they're really hurting for money because they're not supposed to let as many other patients in. And when they let them in and they call them COVID patients, they get it's a boondoggle financially for that in that regard. And so here they are, they put them on a ventilator, and 80% of people, over 80% of people in New York that were put on ventilators died. And my wife's a veterinarian, but she explained how the ventilators work, that you have to be really specialized in ventilator use or else you can kill the patient. And they didn't apparently didn't have enough staff to have that specialty to use that ventilator well, and patients were killed with the ventilators. Um, and the remdesivir studies had showed that about 50%, in some studies, 50% of people that took remdesivir had their I believe it was their livers shut down by the remdesivir, or maybe their kidney functions. But either way, it basically shut down some major organs, as remdesivir does to people, and it's just so toxic and dangerous. And so, I have I didn't get to talk about remdesivir in my first film, but I'm actually doing a sequel of Shots Eugenics to Pandemics, where I will talk more about the remdesivir, but I do talk about the ventilators in my film, of course. And so they say actually that there was virtually no deaths outside the hospitals, and it's that's really bizarre. So this is such a scary, deadly thing, COVID-19, that doesn't kill people outside the hospitals, but once you get in the hospital, yes, there's much better chance you're going to die, and you virtually little to no chance you'll die if you don't go into the hospital. That should tell people something, that it could be something they did in the hospital that actually killed you, sadly enough. And I don't have that particular element in my film, but I do have the fact that nurses blowing the whistle on the fact that people were not really COVID and being put on ventilators. They came up negative for COVID, and yet they were still being put on ventilators. And they said, well, it could be COVID. People were being called COVID deaths when about 95% of these people had other things that could have been their primary cause of death, like 2.5 times other. This comes from the New York Times. I'm sorry, from ABC News, said that about 95% of people that supposedly died of COVID could have been killed by 2.5 other different things besides
Hmm.
COVID. So and different doctors saying they were really pressured to call them COVID deaths, despite that may not have been COVID at all. It may have been something else, completely different that likely caused their death. So anyway, yeah, this was all the corruption going on, and really to fast track us into this dangerous emergency use authorization of a vaccine that was experimental, and it is it's the experimental use, emergency use vaccine, whatever, of an experimental drug. The experiment was this mRNA technology, which causes your body to reproduce this most toxic element of the illness, the spike protein. And only now are they studies are showing that the spike protein goes throughout your body and stays in your body for months and months and months, and is dangerous and causing people so many problems. Huge spike in deaths, huge spike in heart attacks, huge spike in myocarditis, huge spike in lost pregnancies, huge spike in so many different major illnesses and problems. And that's what we're seeing in bears. That's what we're seeing in so many different other databases on what's going on in the world. And I also show the fact that VAERS is a voluntary reporting system,
Hmm.
and that people can report it if they want to, but it takes a long time to report in that system. And so a Harvard study found that VAERS only captures about 1 to 10% of all the actual deaths and all the actual heart attacks and all the actual strokes and all the actual other major ailments being caused by these dangerous vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines.
Hmm. And people were taking them who weren't even sick to begin with because the fear was out there. They were pushing it left and right. I mean, even with Operation Warp Speed, they even had General Perna come on. And I know it's just about all of society is like, what is this guy saying? Because this guy goes, there is no have or have nots. Everyone will take this vaccine. And you're like, that's not what our country was founded on. That's not
Yeah,
freedom, that's for sure.
right, right. I didn't hear that General Perno you're talking about. That's interesting.
Yeah, he came out on 60 Minutes. He goes, I think it was like either October or November of 2020. There is no have or have nots. Everyone will be taking this vaccine. I mean, there's just so much that happened. Like even early on, like the World Bank, I don't know if you knew this, the World Bank had COVID-19 as a project that ended in 2025. How do you know it's gonna, end five
Right.
years later? It makes no sense. And then I don't know if you were aware of this, but when they withdrew from the WHO in 2020, they just gave the money to Gavi. It's just like a bait and switch.
Wow.
There was so much out there. And another thing too is I know you mentioned the CARES Act in your
Yeah.
documentary. It was actually it wasn't put into place, but it was written in January 2019, a year before all this stuff happened. And one thing that you did a great job of showing is all these tabletop exercises, whether it be Event 201, there was so many like Claude X, Modi SARS in 2012 was one that Germany did. They've been doing these for the longest time.
Yeah, and so my sequel, I'm going to show it was about a dozen or more, about a dozen and a half actually, different tabletop exercises they
Hmm.
did from about 2000 to 2020, you know, which is incredible, that many different simulations for COVID-19 coming. And they
Hmm.
act like, they didn't know it was like taken by surprise by this COVID-19 and it was supposedly it came from some bat market or something in Wuhan, China, when now obviously it came from a lab leak. And the question is, was the lab leak intentional or not? And I'd argue it probably was intentional because this was, making gain of function research, and gain of function is to make it um, jump from animals to humans. And so they're
Hmm.
trying to make it jump from animals to humans. And the fact that they succeeded suggests that they wanted to succeed and they wanted to infect humans with it. And so,
Hmm.
this is part of the eugenics movement, I argue. But yeah, there's just so much to cover. It was hard to explore every aspect of it. And of course, Robert Kennedy Jr., RFK Jr. Did a great job with his book, The Real Anthony Fauci, and in showing all these different simulations, and the real, all the different people, individuals involved in this, and how incredibly corrupt Fauci is. He lords over so many billions of
Hmm.
dollars. And people may not know what you said, what Gavi is, but Gavi is the global alliance of vaccine industry, I believe. But it's just a group that promotes vaccines like crazy all over the world. And the thing is, they promote discarded vaccines, dangerous vaccines, vaccines that cause infertility all over the world, especially with third world countries. And again, another eugenics element. And it was good to capture Bill Gates at his best with eugenics and saying, if we do a good enough job with getting these
Hmm.
vaccines out there, we can lower the population by a good 15%, 10 or 15%, I think he said. So he's talking about cutting the population down by a billion people or so, or whatever it might be, close to a billion people by getting these vaccines out there more. And he's just admitting pretty much that yes, we're going to cause infertility, we're going to cause deaths with these vaccines, and we're going to lower the population. And
Hmm.
so
Yeah, it's incredible that so many people, I mean, not you and I, of course, and all these people who get what's going on, but so many people hold him in some medical authority and some higher authority, and it's like, why? You know?
yeah, yeah, it's absurd. Yeah, it's sad that the mainstream media has been doing this. Allowed him to be the mouthpiece for a while. It's pathetic just because he supposedly came up with a good computer when really, again, showing that clip of that top IBM executive saying no, he was just being propped up by IBM. No, he's no brainchild of anything. He's a college dropout who just was a good front man for all that for Microsoft or whatever. So I mean, or Apple computer, I can't remember now, but either way, for Microsoft it is. Um, so I do, yeah. I was glad though. I mean, yeah, I guess I found out that there was about maybe 80 or 90, somewhere between 70 and 90 censored films when that group Children's Health Defense did a Christmas film special of listing and talking about all the censored films out there about COVID-19, and they interviewed me, and I was glad to be interviewed about it. And when they showed their list of like 70 to 90 censored films on COVID-19, I thought, how in the world, who's going to want to watch my film? But people still do want to watch it because I've got music in there, and
Hmm.
I've got fake ads, and I've got um, people seem to like the dark humor, and so I just felt like I have to entertain a bit in between the all the dark facts.
Hmm.
Um, So people said that they were glad they could get through it much easier, even though it's long, 2 hours and 26 minutes. They get through it easier with all the jokes and the joke advertisements and things like that.
Oh, especially things like GE and the other thing back with the eugenics, they really had chants like that
Oh, like what? Oh, right,
that you
right.
had in the film, or
They
did you just
did, yeah, yeah. That was the eugenics. You mean the eugenics
yeah,
record
the
off
ones that
the song?
worked in eugenics had those like chants that they were
So
doing those.
yeah, that's what they apparently did. That was actually from Eugene Black's
Hmm.
book, A War Against the Weak. He had the lyrics to their chants. It was yeah, bizarre stuff. So I'm
I mean,
glad.
how much more inhumane can you get? I mean, I guess
Yeah,
who would be thrown in there is someone like Henry Kissinger because he's definitely not a humanitarian.
nah. Yeah, I mean it is easy to throw. There's loads of people that just fit right into their eugenics movement. But yeah, and I'm sure there's more people than all the people I mentioned that were in line with this eugenics movement. I just quoted some of I put the names of some of the top donors to it, and you know, the Rockefeller's own, they started Chase Bank, and the J.P. Morgan family, of course, started J.P. Morgan, and they merged to be J.P. Morgan Chase, the top bank in the world. So it's just like the evidence that two of these top donors to eugenics also own the top bank in the world. So yes, they are some of the wealthiest people in the world for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, and just like everything tying in together, like back in the day, I wanted for some reason, I don't know why I did, but I wanted to be an actor, right? So I lived in LA for 10 years, was doing all this extra work. And then when 2016 came around, it kind of like woke me up because it was all like and it was part of it even before that, but it was like all like programming. Like they would constantly book you for the same thing where before I'd be pedestrian or FBI or lawyer, you name it, and I was just like, this is all not all of it probably, but a lot of it was just like programming, whether it be tearing down statutes, doing this, doing that. There was an episode of NCIS LA that I worked on where I was like a hostage in an office, and get this, it was about at the end they had this group that was like ISIS holding us hostage, but it was an Irish one, and it was all weird. And then at the end, I rewatched the episode, and at the end, it was all about saving a vaccine. There was a
Yeah.
bioweapon vaccine, and then I was on this TV show. I don't know if you're aware of it, that Michael Bay produced called The Last Ship, where all of humanity was wiped out by a pandemic. And uh, it's just like, yeah, I was like,
Yeah,
even
it's like
Hollywood, they're using it.
yeah, they call that predictive programming, I believe,
Exactly, yeah.
where they try to get your mind ready to accept that this could happen, and yeah,
Hmm.
so yeah, I I've heard a lot about that predictive programming. I haven't looked heavily into it, but I could see that being the case. I mean, it's good that you saw some of it in Hollywood doing the work you were doing. I
Hmm.
Yeah, there are so many ways they try to manipulate our minds to accept these fascist things that they do to us.
Hmm.
And so I'm sorry that the I had a message up there. This program is being recorded, and click OK, and I just clicked it just now because I didn't know I had to click it. I hope that everything is recorded OK.
Oh yeah, it should be fine, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure if you, just in case if it's not recorded, okay, I'm, perfectly good.
I'm pretty sure we're
Okay, good.
fine, yeah. But
Cool.
another thing that I did throughout because my dad was a pharmacist, right? So
Okay.
I had worked in a pharmacy for a while over in LA, and we were instructed, and this is I had, I was born in 1980, so about 28, 29 is when I got into, natural health and eating healthy and everything, and things just weren't adding up when I was working in the pharmacy because we were instructed to call, get this, on weekends. We were instructed to call. There was a calling list to call like primarily these elderly patients and try to get them to take medications that they obviously weren't taking anymore, you know? So it's to me, it was, just all about the profits.
Yeah, it sounds that way. Yeah, and that probably got you understanding why um, now they're pushing these drugs like crazy on TV. I
Hmm.
hear that America and New Zealand are the only developed countries that allow advertising of these pharmaceutical drugs on
Jeez.
TV
Okay.
the way we do. And so yeah, they're pushing them like crazy. And sure, some of them might be good for you and healthy, but some of them could have problems. And yeah, it might be might be some corruption that got them you know uh, kind of passed by the FDA. And who knows? It's I do hear people like I hear drugs like Tamiflu were really corrupt in the way that former former Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld was highly invested in Tamiflu and got that passed by the FDA when it's got all kinds of toxic elements to it. I hear so.
And that was one when I was working in the pharmacy that they were pushing because they had that, thing that almost turned into like a COVID type situation, but they never, went with the masking and all that vaccines. They just, offered that Tamiflu as a solution.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's there's just a lot of corruption, and that's why I think even though I am not crazy about all of course, Trump's actions, I made good decisions and bad decisions, but a lot of bad decisions, but some good decisions. I think I do like Robert Kennedy Jr. I think he's been uh, tireless activist all his life. He saved our water supplies from polluters like DuPont and all these. He had River Keepers was one of his groups, and he spent years, decades doing that kind of work. And so, from what I heard in an interview with his friend Alec Baldwin, the actor, Alec Baldwin asked him, "How did you get into this vaccine activism you're now doing after doing all that defense of our rivers and defense of our watersheds and our water supply?" And he said, as I was going around the country suing, these big corporations for polluting our water, um, he said that he would, maybe making speeches around the country, and this group of mothers would just trail him on his at all his speeches and come to him and just beg him, please, can you investigate what's happening with our kids becoming autistic? We think it's due to these vaccines. And finally, he said one mother like tracked him down his I think his home in maybe Cape Cod or Martha's Vineyard or so, and just camped out on his doorstep and said, "I have this stack of studies that proves that these corrupted vaccines are causing autism in our kids." And um, and so he finally agreed to read them. I mean, I think he already read some of them before, but he read the stack she had, and he couldn't disagree with it. And he said, "Okay, I'll take on your cause." And that's when he started the Children's Health Defense, because he basically took those studies and he brought them to all the people he knew throughout, because his family was so connected with government health that he took them to the top officials, and he could tell they were giving him the runaround. And
Hmm.
he, with all the work he had done, saving our water supply, he really knew the science. He read tons of these kinds of peer-reviewed studies all the time for court cases, and that he won. And so I really believe that he was pushed to, he says he was pulled basically, kicking and screaming into the vaccine activist world. And he says, of course, it's not pro or anti-vax. It's not anti-vaccine. He's just anti-corrupted vaccines. And sadly, the corruption in our government has led to these corrupt vaccines. And he, that's when he started that. And I think now he's trying, but he's got a huge task ahead, ahead of him, because he's got so many people, so these incredibly powerful, wealthy forces working against him on this. but he's trying to slowly but surely turn things around and take the slowly but surely get the COVID-19 vaccines out of our lives. But he's doing it, category at a time, like pregnant women. He's saying he's not recommending the vaccine anymore too, and kids, healthy kids, he's not recommending the vaccine, COVID-19 vaccine to anymore. So he's trying to do it a bit at a time and do these studies, that he can basically show the public, clear evidence, even though the evidence is already out there in studies from other countries for sure, but try to show, basically the latest studies he's trying to get together to present to the public to, get the COVID-19 vaccines off the market. Now, I hear that there's so many forces working against him that even the CDC site, when he announced they weren't recommending the COVID-19 vaccine for pregnant women and healthy kids anymore, that the website hasn't been changed. And so obviously there's just too many people working against him that it's hard for him to do what he really wants to do, but we'll see.
Hmm. Now, what do you think about one thing you mentioned in the film, and there's other things, was like the Great Barrington Declaration. Now, nothing really happened, did it, with that? But it did raise awareness, definitely.
Yeah, yeah, nothing did happen with that. Here you had this Harvard, public health doctor, this Oxford, great doctor, and this Stanford doctor all getting together to write that declaration to say this, these kind of actions that the U.S. government and all these Western governments are taking about this COVID-19 situation are not good for the public. These aren't the right actions. We can't believe they're doing this, and we don't understand why we aren't letting people just if they get infected, they're immune, and they should be immune, and they don't need this vaccine. And so they're trying to raise awareness. They're trying to get something done together. They got tons, huge amounts of signatures of people that agree with them on this. Huge amounts of physician signatures and scientist signatures. Huge amounts of public signatures in general. So it didn't do a whole lot, but it did raise a lot of awareness. And then it eventually got this Jay Bakhtiari, put in, working under RFK Jr. I believe he's now head of FDA. Is that right?
Mm.
And I think Makari's head of CDC, or the other way around. I forget now. But either way, I think that's the way it is. But um, so I'm glad at least that um, doctor ends up, working on this issue in the government. So I'm glad they accomplished that, because some of
Mhm.
these other doctors that did things like went a different direction and spoke out against what the government was trying to say you had to do and say, they lost their licenses. Like,
Hmm.
you
Oh yeah.
Trump basically listened to a doctor who was using hydroxychloroquine with zinc, and was basically curing people fast with that. And I think they were throwing in an antibiotic with that too, as azithromycin or something. But either way, so he repeated that after just like lots of doctors were telling him, yes, this is really helpful. Lots of hospitals were using the hydroxychloroquine with zinc too. But then because he said it, he thinks it's helpful. Of course, sadly enough, the anti-Trumpers just went into overdrive with, oh my God, I can't believe he's saying this. Meanwhile, hydroxychloroquine is a WHO essential drug. It's been on an essential drug for decades, and as is ivermectin. And so um, it's incredible that they demonize that, and the way they were able to successfully demonize it is Gates threw tons of money into studies all around the country, and in Baltimore and Maryland, where I live, they gave tons of money to the University of Maryland to do a study with hydroxychloroquine a particular way, and that way was to give a way too high of a dose of hydroxychloroquine to people,
Hmm.
and then say, "Oh, look what it's doing. It's really dangerous for people. We've got to stop this study." And so that's what they came out with, that this drug, in a super high dose is dangerous for people.
Hmm.
Tylenol in a super high dose can be dangerous. I mean, all kinds of over-the-counter drugs can be dangerous. So that's what they did. And then the anti-Trump media just jumped on those studies that Gates funded and said, "Oh, look, you see, Trump's crazy for recommending this." And the media was just very compliant with that without looking into it themselves at all. None of them said that these drugs like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine that they're demonizing were World Health Organization essential drugs, and
Hmm.
they're being used off label for this for COVID-19. Doctors, loads of doctors have said yes. Doctors use drugs in an off-label way all the time. Different drugs that could have similar protective elements or helpful elements are used off-label to try to solve problems that can't be solved. And they're having and so other studies started coming out that yes, hydroxychloroquine with zinc was very helpful for COVID-19. And they also found that ivermectin was very helpful for COVID-19, and yet they wouldn't talk about those studies at all. And those are studies that are happening in other countries. So you get countries like Mexico that has hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin in shelves in all their airports. They just have them in different dispensaries, available for people. So, and a number of countries were doing that, just making these essential drugs very available for COVID-19. And
Hmm.
here we are totally demonizing it in the U.S. and some other Western countries.
Now, have you heard that they have now messed with just about all of the ivermectin supply? That it has like I think titanium dioxide or something in it now?
Wow, I haven't heard that.
Yeah, you might want to look into that. But these corporations, I mean, they'll do anything, you know?
Wow. Oh God, I didn't hear that at all. Thanks for telling me. It is incredible what they'll do, what these eugenicists will do to mess with a drug that works to save people.
Hmm.
Now when I got COVID once, uh, I believe I don't even know. It's hard to even know these days what was COVID and what's not because the PCR tests. I mean, the inventor of the
That's
PCR.
another thing too. Yeah, and he had
Yeah,
talked about that for years, Kerry Mullis. I know when I was living in LA, I started my own natural health club at the community college I was going to, and I showed this documentary on HIV called House of Numbers. And some of those clips that you had were in House of Numbers
great.
back then, where he's like Fauci doesn't know anything about anything, and the
Yeah,
PCR test how it can be faulty. They showed that in that documentary back then.
great. Yeah, Kerry Mullis is a Nobel Prize winning inventor of the
Hmm.
PCR test. And he says, he said publicly, this PCR test is not meant to diagnose. It's because it can show that you have just a little of something of just about anything you want to find. And it doesn't mean that you're sick. It doesn't mean you have that illness, and it's not to be used that way. And here they are, they're using the PCR test to say, oh, you got COVID-19, even though you may not even have any symptoms, or you may have some symptoms, but it may not be of COVID-19, maybe something completely different. So we don't even know for sure what COVID-19 certainly was, but whatever it was, I all I know is me and my wife went to this RFK Jr. kind of sponsored or Children's Health Defense sponsored rally in Washington D.C. and there was many doctors there and many different speakers there, and there was planes flying and helicopters flying over it, like as if monitoring things. And when we got home from that, that was the first time we got sick, and I'd been to Black Lives Matters rallies and different other rallies and never got sick at all.
Hmm.
And I was, packed in at these other things too, these other rallies. And so here I was at this one and I get sick. And so it's just a wonder about things. But because I did read an article that said that DARPA, the defense, defense research project group, had found a way to aerosolize the COVID-19 vaccines before they came out with it publicly. And so it's just a wonder if they didn't aerosolize things and drop it on different places, where they wanted to,
Hmm.
but who knows. I just think though that I did get something, and maybe it was COVID-19. I assume I came up positive on some test, drugstore bought test. I think it
Hmm.
was. It was a drugstore. Basically, it was going in the line at the drugstore and getting the test, but whatever. So came up positive. I was sick for longer than usual, of course, like very sick for a week, maybe at 103 temperature. And but as soon as I got the hydroxychloroquine with zinc, and I first took some ivermectin, and that didn't appear to help that much, but couldn't really tell. But when I got the hydroxychloroquine with zinc, within 8 hours, my 103 temperature went down to normal. Went
Hmm.
down to 98.6, pretty much 99, something like that. And my wife got it maybe 2 or 3 days later. She first got the symptoms that I had. And again, when she tried the hydroxychloroquine with zinc, her fever, which was up around 102, went down to practically normal within 8 hours.
Hmm.
And so it's pretty amazing to experience that. So did that completely cure me? I don't know, but it's sure isn't a coincidence that things got better so fast with that, and for both me and her. So yeah,
Yeah. And what about I don't know if you were aware of this, but the CDC had for the longest time on the COVID-19, PDF, I forget what page it was on, but because it was several pages long, but they said no quantifiable isolates have been found for COVID-19. They haven't even isolated the virus. And they even said on NBC News, they interviewed a guy in China and he goes, they never isolated the virus.
yeah. There's a researcher, a guy who is a professor in Canada, Michelle Chasudovsky, who has this website, globalresearch.ca, who we had published in somewhere in Covert Action Quarterly back in early mid, I guess it was the mid '90s, 1990s, and he started this, his own journal after that. But he argues with lots of endnotes and facts that yes, no one's shown that they actually have an isolated version of the COVID-19. So it's hard to know if it really is a virus out there, or if it's something else that's caused a lot of sicknesses and a lot of deaths.
Hmm.
I don't know for sure.
Yeah. Now, what do you think of people like Dr. Tom Cowan or Andrew Kaufman who say, contagion is a myth?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting idea. I don't know what to make of it. There could be some truth to it, but I really don't know. I don't know. I haven't looked into
Hmm.
their um their perspective enough. It's possible. I do get into the idea that allopathic medicine is for all the good it's done for people in some ways. In other ways, it just really um, led to people not to look at naturopathic medicine, homeopathic medicine, chiropractic medicine, all different other kinds of
Hmm.
medicine that were as or more popular than allopathic medicine at the start of these. Like the naturopathic homeopathic medicines started, a few years before allopathic medicine started, and they say, and so it's I could believe a lot of different angles. I just don't know. I haven't explored enough of it. Have you found anything that you found supported that a lot?
I just, I see exactly where they're coming from, and it would definitely make sense. But, also I know when you play that game, you say viruses don't exist, you lose so many people. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
when you're getting your message out, you lose so many people. So, where does it go? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's hard to know. Yeah, it's hard to know how far you can even go with talking to people about in that from that angle. I do. There is at least one illness that I do believe isn't contagious, and that's that I'm gonna come out with in my next film is the polio. you
Mm-hmm.
know, what they call polio, because they've done really great studies on polio, and the best, researchers that I've read have seemed to say that polio is really caused by environmental issues, and these environmental issues are particularly like DDT, that famous anti like uh, er, anti herb and anti plant life toxin that they used to clear areas during World War II. They had this excess supply of this DDT, and so they then used that, saying, okay, no, it was actually a de-lysing agent, I think, is what it was. Wasn't it? Wasn't Yeah, that's what it was, a de-lysing type agent, getting rid of all kinds of insects. And now Rachel Carlson exposed it as getting rid of bird life in general. It was killing so many birds, but it was really also killing humans. And it was really bad. And they think that was one of the biggest causes of polio.
Mm-hmm.
And we found DDT and similar kind of anti-insect agents around the world. When those are used, there's higher incidence of polio in those areas, and they try to ban those agents all over the world. But that seems to be the biggest correlate, with any kind of polio that's been found out there.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing about your documentary that is also so great is that it shows so many different people, whether it be Rima LeBeau, Sukrit Bhakti, Dolores Cahill, Dr. Northrup. It shows that so many people, nurses speaking out. It shows that so many people are like us and understood what was really going on and are speaking out. And one thing that you touched upon with Dr. Northrup is like Dr. Northrup used to be all over the mainstream. She'd be interviewed left and right. And now look at her.
Yeah. And so, yeah, the government's attacked. They use these medical commissions to attack so many of these doctors. Dr. Meryl Nass was considered a bioweapons expert about anthrax. And then
Hmm.
she ends up losing her medical license because she's attacked just for giving hydroxychloroquine with zinc, and ivermectin to patients to help with whatever they were dealing with. And so this has happened, like award winning doctor. He won national and international awards for his cardiology and nephrology practice. And he was vice president of Baylor University Medical School. Dr. Peter McCullough, brilliant,
Yeah.
brilliant
Oh,
doctor.
another one.
And
Hmm.
they took away all his titles. It's horrible what they've done to these doctors. So yeah, it's I'm glad you remember a lot of these doctors and different other people in my film that just legitimize, while we're talking about, and when mainstream media delegitimizes so many of these great physicians that who were originally started giving, like Dr. Peter McCullough gave the vaccine to his patients, thinking it was fine, not realizing. And when he saw what was happening, the bad things happening to his patients, that's when he stopped giving it, and that's when he changed his mind. And that's when he
Hmm.
started picking up on difference. So these aren't people that are so-called anti-vax, doctors. These are people that are pro-vaccine until they saw the horrible results of this dangerous vaccine, COVID-19 vaccine. Yeah.
Hmm. So what do you think the future is going to be like? Do you think more people will be waking up or what do you think?
I think, well, what I hear right now is that the latest Rasmussen poll said that 51%, I believe they said, of people believe that these COVID-19 vaccines cause some kind of problems with the heart. And so the tide is turning for sure.
Hmm.
That majority of people are starting to believe that these COVID-19 vaccines are dangerous, and I just hopefully it's going to keep, that progression is going to keep going that way despite people's feelings about, President Donald Trump. I just think all politicians are beholden to their donors, and they all have good and bad in them. And I really don't have an opinion on Trump. I disliked maybe half or more the things he's done, and then some things of course I like what he's done, especially with putting RFK Jr. in his position, and McCary from Hopkins, who was a real skeptic of the COVID-19
Hmm.
narrative, in that top position, and Jay Bhattacharya in his position, and all these good doctors and professionals in their positions. Hopefully, that's of course I think that's the real positive of what Trump's done. And So I just think that I think the tide's turning, and I think the world's awakening to a lot of what
Hmm.
we're talking about for sure.
Yeah. Do you think the backdraw is, do you think that all these politicians are bought and sold? So nothing is going to be accomplished. Well, what do you think on that? Well, obviously, I think that you think that there's greater outlook, that not everyone is part of the club or bought and sold.
I do think most politicians are bought and sold. I mean,
Hmm.
I I'm almost I feel bad about the fact that I believed in free college and free and national health care and all that, and so I phone banked for Bernie Sanders for two of his presidential campaigns, and then I see him grilling RFK Jr. about children's health defense onesies, and it was just such a joke. It was like ridiculous, and I'm so glad RFK Jr. pointed out that Bernie Sanders was one of the biggest recipients of pharmaceutical companies' money and so um, it just shows that they're all corrupt. All politicians are corrupt. I mean, there's just no way around it. But you got to look at the good and the bad of what they do, and try to sift through some of the good and bad. And Ron Johnson is just that Republican politician that most Democrats love to hate. And I don't even know what his policies are that
Hmm.
Democrats hate so much. But I trust. Okay, I may not agree with him about a lot of his policies, but the fact that he held these different Senate committee hearings on COVID-19 to get all these great points of view from Dr. Peter McCullough, and all these other great doctors, Dr. Pierre Corey, et cetera, who were really top-notch doctors, and other people that were injured by the vaccines to testify, and nurses testifying, was fantastic. So,
Hmm.
uh, I'm not, that's just stands above everything else for me.
And not only that, I know p other people were there too, because I've interviewed Jason Christoph. He's a self-sabotage coach, and he spoke there too. So there, you get all different spectrums speaking out. And one thing is, like politics or don't, I'm not a fan of, political things, but maybe it'll wake someone up to what's going on, or wake someone up to die suddenly, you name it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I agree that it hopefully will wake people up in general, and it'll get the word out there in a better way. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, well,
Um,
I really appreciate you, coming on the podcast as a guest. If someone wants to watch your documentaries, where would they go? Just would they just look it up on line, and then they can find them on like streaming platforms and such?
the best way to find all my work is to go to johnpotash.com. That's JohnPotash.com, and you should be able to find links to all my work. You may have to look through different areas, but most of it's on the front page. Those, for my books, they're more on, the like kind of item book pages and stuff. Um, but yeah, there's you can go there to find either my first book, FBI War on Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders, or my second book, Drugs as Weapons Against Us, the CIA War on Musicians and Activists, or the films based on those books, or my film Shots, Eugenics to Pandemics. But my latest film is CIA Drugs Are Us, a Drugs as Weapons sequel, which continues like the comic um, element of looking at that topic through a comic lens. Just have some dark humor in there too. But I'm so glad that you really liked Shots Eugenics to Pandemics, because That's been the hardest one to get the word out on, just because of all the censorship. And I'm glad to be talking about it with someone who's so knowledgeable about it too.
Hmm.
So it's been a good
Yeah,
time.
well, well, I really appreciate you, coming on. We'll have to do it again sometime. And thanks for, speaking up and just being a light in this world because there's so much going on that, we need to unite for all of humanity.
I agree, Mark. Thanks again.
Yeah.